There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. You fool me, we can't get fooled again.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around. What do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters. The very minds of the people we are trying to save. Until we do, these people are still part of that system. That makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Are you listening to me, Leo? Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening?
And welcome to Super Bowl Sunday 2019, February the 3rd. We're not going to talk anything about the Super Bowl. It doesn't really matter in our lives. Well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and retract that immediately right now. Because I remember in 2001, after September 11th, that following Super Bowl was won by Tom Brady and the Patriots. And the Patriots winning the Super Bowl that year could not have been more needed. And it did unify people. It made them feel good. But anyway, so you may have heard me calling out these celebrities and talking heads about gun control. People like Colin Noir, Steven Crowder, Devin Tracy, Ben Shapiro, and more, who have communicated with me or had their own fans plead for them to debate me, and they cuck out the second they are called to the parking lot. The media and those talking heads have proven themselves to be nothing more than entertainment. So I have trash talked over social media to get someone to advance these discussions. The vast majority of people that even email me end up becoming unresponsive once they even know that I'm serious. But I have met a handful of authentic people with this tactic. And in this episode, we were lucky enough to find another. So please sit back and enjoy as fellow Arizonians, Jordan McManus and myself partake in a civilized, mature, and intellectually honest debate over gun control in these United States. Yeah, it really happened, which I believe is a sign of the end times.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning. Expression. Or sound.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning. Noun. Expression. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A subtle difference in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression or sound.
Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning, expression, or sound.
All right, so Jordan, what we are going to do here, we are going to achieve the impossible. We are going to have civilized discussion on the Second Amendment and gun control. So
it's funny because it is so hard to actually have civil discussions.
Yeah, in this day and age, I feel like I am absolutely lost with the ability to have a civilized discussion. If I say something to what we would generally consider conservative, you know, then suddenly because I say something that's, of course, a left idea, that means I'm anti-conservative, which I did not say that at all. Or if I say something that is, criticizing Trump, then I'm anti-Trump. If I say something supporting Trump, then I'm pro-Trump. It's like, can we just like focus on one tiny issue at a time? Do we have to cluster into these tribes?
I absolutely agree with that because I don't really subscribe to one party or another. I hold libertarian views, I hold liberal views, I hold conservative views. I'm very independent, so I totally feel you on that. I don't like to get pigeonholed into one concept and have to buy into all of them.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that you are willing to do this right now, I think it's commendable in you. I understand that with my background and doing public media often, I can be intimidating when I come at somebody. So the idea that you're willing to put yourself out there, I think is just commendable, period. So going forward, let's just like give everybody that listens an introduction essentially to who you are and maybe some of your grounding principles to kind of set the stage. Then I'll set the stage. And if we can give each other 10-minute control blocks, I think that will be what I'd like to try this time. I've tried a bunch of different ways of doing it, and everything seems to fall apart. So, like, I would maybe put I suggest that putting one of us in complete control for a 10-minute block is the way to narrow it down. And I'll get into my part after you do yours.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm not sure I'm going to need exactly full 10 minutes, but we can just play the timing by ear. But yeah, absolutely. I'll let you have the floor, and if you let me have it as well, that's cool with me. And honestly, it's your background that really kind of attracted me to talking to you. I do have quite a few beliefs about law enforcement, especially modern-day law enforcement and reform and that kind of stuff. So if you want to get into that, we can also do that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So why do you think anyone should listen to you? What are you coming from?
I don't believe anybody should have to listen to me. I believe that everybody should have a voice. I'm a staunch believer in the First Amendment. I will absolutely support and defend someone's right to the most extreme example, say whatever it is they please. I would support an absolute racist opportunity to talk. Not that I would agree with anything that they would say, but I'm absolutely for freedom in every form of it. When it comes to the Second Amendment, I believe it's an absolute right that the Founding Fathers saw at the time and wholeheartedly believed that in order to prevent tyranny, that this was something that had to be instilled in paper. I'll never go out on a limb and say that all of my views are right. Honestly, my views have changed over the years, quite a few times back and forth. But where I'm coming from is I believe everybody has the right to say whatever it is they want, and that should absolutely be protected and encouraged. Like I use with the most extreme example of blatant racism. I'm absolutely for people shooting themselves in the foot. Socially, and however that might play out. I'm absolutely for people doing that, but I don't believe people should be silenced.
What would be your general gun position? So I know you say it's an absolute right, and I'm not trying to take this up as a block, but you can just set the stage to your general position.
Okay, my general position on the Second Amendment is that it's wholly for the defense of tyranny from a tyrannical government, if that should ever occur. Because of that, it's a right that should not be infringed. When talking about uses of firearms for self-defense, hunting, target shooting, those are all just lawful uses that come along with the right of having a firearm. But the right of it, and where I'm going to argue from, is that it's a right to defend against tyranny, and nothing more. It has nothing to do with self-defense. That it has nothing to do with hunting. Although those are legal uses of the firearm, that is not why it's right.
Okay, I can't argue with that too much from at least the logic point. You are consistent so far, so I'll get to that one. There's obviously things there that I'm going to disagree with, but sure. So I can set the stage real quick. Most people, of course, are going to know this if they're listening to me at all, but I joined the Marine Corps at 17, was in the anti-terrorism security team for 4 years. I left the Marine Corps as a sergeant in a fairly elite unit of weapons handling. SPAR 4s and MP5s were our primary weapon to do close quarters battles, nuclear recapture missions, embassy rescues, things like that. We would have been called in to rescue Benghazi if somebody would have done their job. So that's an example of what we did there. I then left, went to Baltimore, worked in East and West Baltimore, kind of stuff people see on the wire. I was an doctor, became a major case detective, became a supervisor, unit commander, a bunch of other units, locked up well over 300 people, confiscated uncountable guns and drugs off the streets of Baltimore, the highest crime and murder rate in the United States at the moment of major cities. So I then went and began, after that career and those experiences, I then became a scholar and started to study the actual sciences behind policing and what we do. So my general position when it comes to the Second Amendment is I don't know what that Second Amendment says, and I don't think anyone can say they know what it says. We are going by how it is interpreted by the Supreme Court. So we're actually relying on the Supreme Court, not the Constitution. I would definitely argue about what the Constitution was saying. One example there that I would say is I think that the idea of fighting back against people like me and the units I was in is silly. I think there are 300 grown men that thought that little 190-pound Michael was somebody they could get away from. They were wrong every fucking time. So I never really thought that rational. But I do think that we should have protections in place that guarantee hunters and home defense specific rights that are very clear and would be laid out in a way that made sense to everybody to re-envision it. One of the reasons why I think we should re-envision it is because we just don't know what it says, and I think it seems like what if you want to look at it as an approach against tyranny, the way that the Supreme Court ruled on it is not a tyrannical approach. It is a self-defense approach that they're talking about, and that doesn't really make sense to me. If we're going to go with tyranny, we need to be thinking about it very differently. For example, handguns don't serve you much of a benefit against going through a tyrannical army if that was the state and government. You would need actual military weapons, which is a different discussion because I am not anti-AR-15. They're not fucking used in crimes. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell anybody that's against them. I get the potential argument, but how they actually do things is different. So I think those rights should be put in place, and I think the Founding Fathers would agree with me in a very different perspective because the Declaration of Independence came before the Constitution, and the primary objective of creating the Constitution was to create a country where we could pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that is the primary goal. And I think that the way, with the total situation of the drug war, the way policing has been set up, our culture, American culture, is that it is impossible for someone to actually be free and to have liberty the way we have interpreted the Second Amendment. You are not free to go to a rock concert and not be in complete fear of somebody mowing down hundreds of people around you because of the way we have interpreted it. And I think that supersedes the rights because, as we've already agreed upon in America, your rights end where someone else's begin. And I think when you're talking about things like handguns, I think they have sown so much fear in society that they are negative and they are impeding on other people's rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is my general standard, and whether you want to go first or I go first, it's up to you.
I'll let you go first if you'd like.
Okay, so let me see where we're at. We're at 12 minutes right now, so I'm going to try to keep on track of this thing here. You, when you say that the Constitution would say this, the Constitution says that with a what is it? Come on, give me the opening line. A well-regulated militia being necessary. Oh, sorry, it's right. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. So my first question there is, do you have a well-regulated militia?
Yeah, absolutely. So you said that your position is that the Second Amendment is solely based off the interpretation of the Supreme Court. Yes and no. It's partly it's interpreted by the Supreme Court, but it's not just their whim that how they interpret it. They use all available documentation. And they go back into the 1700s and look at when the time was when they wrote the Second Amendment. And they use supporting documents. They use the Constitution itself in different places to gather the meanings for the words. So a well-regulated militia, well-regulated in the 1700s, simply means operating freely, operating as designed, operating as instructed. It means it's operating as it should. It doesn't mean it's well-regulated like the NFA regulates firearms, where it's strict control. Unfortunately, words have changed meanings over the years, and that is absolutely one of them. It was used long before the 1700s, and I believe it was used, from what I was reading a long time ago, it was used up to about a century after the 1700s. So up to the 1800s was well-regulated. It just meant something was operating as it should. Like if your car starts in the morning, it's well-regulated. Militia. Militia is used many times in the Constitution. It's also used in hundreds of times in all the supporting documents, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. At the time it was written, I don't believe the Founding Fathers had the concept of what a National Guard would look like, the modern day interpretation of what our National Guard is. I don't believe they saw that coming. I think that if they had seen it, they might have actually seen that as a standing army, for which they would have been writing the Second Amendment, or possibly a standing army. The militia simply means the people. That's the way the Supreme Court has seen it. Even back to the 1800s. I want to say it was the late 1800s, 1890s or something like that. There was a Supreme Court case where in the 1800s they ruled that the militia meant individual rights and not the state's rights. That principle has been continued on throughout court cases, through the Supreme Court and at the appellate level. And yeah, I believe we absolutely have a well-regulated militia, especially since there's just so many guns in this country. It's absolutely a militia that can be well-regulated. The example I would point to is if you were to hypothetically think that like North Korea or China or name your country were to invade Florida or California, doesn't matter. Who would be their biggest adversary? Would it be the U.S. military or would it be the United States people? Because I'm pretty sure if some other country decided to just invade Florida, there would be a whole lot of people in this country that would get in their cars and drive to Florida and try to fight that off, far more than the military. And that would be the militia. Further going down into what the militia says, states define militias. Arizona state law actually defines the militia. They define it as all people. I think it's between the ages of 18 and 45, not elected officials, not members of legislative, and not members of the clergy. They created express distinct difference between the Arizona State National Guard and the militia being the people. In the, I don't think it's the Constitution, but in some of the supporting documents, they talk about the organized militia and the unorganized militia. The organized militia would constitute National Guards. The unorganized militia would just simply be the people that are not members of the National Guard. So yeah, I believe we do have a good, well-regulated militia.
Who would comprise this? Who would make up the body of this militia?
According to
you, that's one thing I do want to say though, is I don't really care what other people say. I care what you believe.
My personal belief is
I don't care if Jefferson said it. You know,
okay.
Like I just don't care.
Okay. Well, I believe that the militia. My personal belief is the militia is all people in all states, pretty much as a whole, other than elected government officials. So that would exempt local law enforcement, anybody that's been appointed.
Yeah, I mean, general citizens, I get that. But
yeah, sure.
But who would these people be in reality? right? So in reality, you are talking about people who have guns in their house, who kind of fetishize about being able to defend themselves. But what I'm trying to say is that gang members who are tough, well-regulated, had guns at their immediate disposal and were anticipating my arrival, had no chance. I'm drawing a disconnect between how these people would actually be a threat to a modern day military.
Possibly the same way the Viet Cong handled the United States military when we went to Vietnam, the same way the Taliban in Afghanistan has handled the United States military over there. We still didn't win that war. Not saying that they won either, but it comes down to guerrilla warfare. If you were actually talking about the United States government literally becoming tyrannical and a general consensus of the people saying, this is enough, we're going to fight. First off, I don't think it would ever go down like that on a national stage. I think it would be much smaller things, very localized events. But guerrilla warfare, it's not going to be a line of men standing up against a line of police officers going head to head, because sure, law enforcement has far superior weapons and tools at their disposal. But if you go into guerrilla warfare, there's absolutely a way that could be done.
Do you believe that American policing is tyrannical right now?
To a point, yes, and to a point, no.
So where the fuck are you guys?
I'm sorry?
Where are you guys? Like, so policing has definitely been tyrannical in certain areas.
Yeah.
But nobody stands up and does anything. Like, you don't have any victories.
Yeah, you know what? I absolutely agree. First thing I'm going to go out and say is that the vast majority of gun owners in this country are fuds. They're not. They'll say they support the Second Amendment and say on paper that they kind of support some of the things I'm saying, but when it came down to brass tacks, there's no way they would risk their lives, their jobs, their livelihood to go put up a fight. I absolutely agree with that. Most people wouldn't do anything. The two examples I would point to, it would be the Battle at Athens and the Bundy Ranch incident. Those were absolutely two events where the people got together.
How many cops died at the Bundy Ranch?
0.
How many of the Bundy crew?
I believe 0.
How many were shot and taken to jail?
Taken to jail, I'm not sure. I think that number was very low, but I don't believe anybody was shot.
Oh yeah, they shot the guy. I thought they killed him, but I'm going to give you the.
Oh yes, you're talking about the guy after he left with the FBI. So yeah, 1, I suppose.
Right. So even that incident, we won.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. I'm just saying I have a really hard time as a military expert and policing conceptualizing that really wins. So even in Vietnam or Korea or Afghanistan, these are choices America has made. The reason that those countries still stand is because we allowed them to. We just didn't go far enough. I don't care how guerrilla tactic Afghanistan and Vietnam are. If we choose to really go, we can turn the whole fucking thing in the glass.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree.
So I'm just saying, it was ideas. Ideas won that. Not guerrilla warfare, ideas of not wanting to see our young people die, ideas of not selling it in hard enough. I don't think combat actually wins any wars. It's always the ideology that comes through and wins in the end. But
I agree.
So I'm just saying I have a hard time gripping that they're an actual threat to anybody's foot. So in police, but like the police do this too, right? So what happens when somebody pulls out a gun during a mass shooting and the police are arriving? Are they actually going to help the situation or hurt it?
It depends on the outcome.
We've killed a lot of innocent people, dude.
Yeah, I absolutely.
We've killed other cops.
Yep, I know.
Because of this. On-duty cops. We have killed our own brothers.
I understand that. That's where my hesitation came from. Yeah, that's where my hesitation came from, because I could point to... I couldn't really point. But I remember reading about a lot of articles where law enforcement has killed people with friendly fire and other officers, other people.
William Corbett and Ja'Kai Colson are two, one's in Baltimore and one's in Prince George's County, that these were just, there was definitely a racial element involved, but they were trying to stop situations that were actually ongoing down. And when the official team responds, they got killed too. So I don't understand, how would a militia even separate the good guys from the bad guys? And how would you not know where your own enemies are? Like, we've had situations where two people would be trying to innocently help something, and both are Second Amendment carriers being both good guys, and they're fighting each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how we're going to prevent that. I feel like the idea of the general citizen, those clowns, thinking that they can come up against these refined killing machines. I don't know. I mean, dude, I have gone through a lot of doors, and I'm fucking unscathed, and I am by far not the baddest motherfucker out there.
Mm-hmm. I understand what you're saying.
I'm out. You're in control. You can pick me now, and then we'll come back.
No, sure. I absolutely see where you're coming from. The point at which I would disagree is because of something that has a low likelihood of being successful, or I think at this point almost unimaginable how that would play out. I don't believe that's grounds for saying that the right is basically useless, because it's not winnable. The first example I gave, Battle of Athens.
Can I just concede that?
I'm sorry?
I'll just concede that if you want.
Oh, okay. The second point
you could have a wall that's ineffective, but if it slows the enemy down, well, sure. Yeah, it still matters to put it there. So yeah. You win that.
Okay. I don't look at it like winning or losing, but thank you. The problem with the Second Amendment being the militia being the people is who makes that call? How does it happen? How does it play out? And I don't really have an answer for that. I think that's one of the beauties of the Second Amendment is everyone is left guessing, including the government and the people. When enough people decide that a problem is present and they need to handle it, those people pretty much decide how that problem is going to be handled. I believe that's how the Battle of Athens was won, and how the Bundy Ranch incident became not just a huge bloodbath on both sides. But I believe that the Second Amendment at the Bundy Ranch was imperative because they were bearing arms. I don't believe bearing necessarily means pulling the trigger. It could mean carrying or using in defensive display and stuff like that. And because ultimately it was the arms there that got the BLM to go ahead and back off, because they knew that if one side had a negligent discharge, it would have been a bloodbath. Which I think the BLM, regardless of if the BLM was right or wrong in being there, BLM that day in deciding to back down was absolutely the right decision, and allow that to play out in a courtroom. I don't know how the militia could be used to stop tyrannical law enforcement. The problem you run into is until you have the hearts and minds of all your fellow neighbors, you're the crazy guy with a gun. For example, the guy with the killdozer up in the Midwest back in the early 2000s, I believe it was, his town was treating him exceptionally unfairly, and so he armored up a bulldozer and decided to take out the entire town. At that point, he was the crazy guy with a bulldozer that was armored. Fast forward, 15 years later, there's a whole sect of society that sees that guy as a hero. That when he was finally pushed to the end, where the government was tyrannical and not allowing him to be free, he decided to take action. And he didn't use a firearm, but he used the bulldozer. And I think what he did was actually, I'm kind of on his side from what I've read. I think what he did was very noble, and he didn't hurt anybody. He just decided to destroy the town before he decided to take his life. Unfortunately, it got that far, but it's things like that. Until you have the entire population on your side, it's hard to define what the rules are, the rules of engagement for the militia. Like the Bundy Ranch incident, he had the hearts and minds of a lot of people outside of the mainstream media the hearts and minds of a lot of people until those comments came out that were borderline racist, and then he lost them. And that was kind of a turning point for Clive and Bundy. And a lot of people either left or stopped heading that way because they didn't want to be seen as racist because of how the media was portraying that guy. So I'm not really quite sure. I am curious though why you if you see the militia as being an unwinnable solution to government tyranny, why should that be removed as a reason or reasoning for the Second Amendment?
Yeah, because, well, I'm not 100% confident that I will rule against that concept of it. I tried to lead into that a little bit in the beginning. What I'm more against is the interpretation that this is for self-defense. And this is something that because you need to be prepared to fight a tyrannical government, then that means that you can carry a handgun on a public street. Because that handgun being carried on a public street, let's be clear right now, when you're talking about tyranny on a public street, at this moment, like we don't have civil war, we're not being pushed over the edge. I mean, we're super far from shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
but that situation, what that creates is you're talking about killing cops and soldiers. And at this point in time, those are not your enemies. These soldiers and cops are your cousins and your fathers and your neighbors. They're the people living next to you. And all you have to do to get them to not kill you is essentially say, don't kill me when it comes to soldiers. And when it comes to cops, yeah, we have exceptions to it. But 99.9999999% of the time, if you follow the laws of this country and just abide by the regular things, you are never going to run into the police, ever. Right? So what you've then created is because you think it's okay to fight the government, what we have done is we have fought the people. We are sowing fear into the people. And when you said that the people, everyone's left guessing in this thing, see, that's one of my big problems, is that the human being biologically is grossly opposed, dramatically opposed to the unfamiliar. Racism only works because the person's unfamiliar. As soon as you know the person, racism breaks down immediately. So it's never even racism that's real. It's the unfamiliar that's real. And if everyone is unfamiliar, we become super dangerous. And that is how Philando Castile ends up being killed. That is how cops end up killing innocent people. That is why you are scared to shit on a car stop. Dude, I am a fucking pig. And I am scared when I get pulled over. And I don't know any cops that don't get the exact same feeling that the general populace does when they see the red and white, the red and blues in their rearview mirror. And part of it is we already know that we are in this incredibly dangerous situation because we're armed. And we don't know what this cop's going to think about us being armed. We don't know how we can get it out. Sometimes if the cop's in the wrong state of mind of being unfamiliar and in fear, then they could already be jumping the gun just by alerting someone that we have a weapon on us. This shit happens. We have it on camera. And then when cops see that, they get fearful. So there's this video. I imagine you've probably seen it. It's the killing of Deputy Kurt Dinkheller. And what happened was he pulls over this, like it's a pickup truck, and they're on a like dusty road out in the middle of nowhere, which, let me just say, that is the most dangerous policing in the entire world. Everybody that says, oh my God, you were a Baltimore cop. I'm like, Baltimore cop, the last thing I would want to do is be a cop in the middle of nowhere. Like, that's scary.
Yeah,
so
you have no
he was
backup.
right. He's one of those cops that's in the middle of nowhere. He does his car stop, and the guy gets out of the truck and starts shooting at him with a rifle. And the deputy is just he is not in necessarily freeze, but he is in, I cannot bring myself to kill this other human being, even though he's fucking shooting a rifle at me. This deputy cannot work up the ability to kill another human being. And so he's executed right there on camera. And this is seen as this most tragic moment in policing. And every cop watches this video, and it sows into their mind that any car stop can be this. This can be how your life ends if you're not on guard. And the reality is that car stop, they say there's no such thing as a routine car stop. Oh my God, the idea that a car stop is not routine is fucking almost unbelievably unlikely to happen. Like, car stops are a routine thing. It is vastly unlikely that somebody's going to try to hurt a cop. I mean, the maybe like 10 to 20 cops get shot a year. Like, it's like 50 that die, but more than half of them are always from car crashes. So these cops that are getting killed, they're getting killed at these car stops, and only maybe 20 of them at most the entire year. But this sows fear into all of policing. And then police are out killing 1,000 citizens every year because of this fear that's gripping everybody. And that fear is who has a gun. But I don't think that this is why the tyranny thing. I don't necessarily have a problem against that, because our problem in this country is not that you have an AR-15. It's that you have a Glock 17. That's the problem, because I don't know who you are. I don't know that you're a threat. As far as I'm concerned as a cop, if you want to carry around a long rifle, I mean, okay. I mean, we're on the same page. I see you. You see me. As long as you handle it properly, I can't see a problem in the world with that, because we know where we are. It's the fear of who can kill us. Who is the ape with the dust?
Personally, I'm a bit obsessive about the pursuit of not being wrong, which is very different than the pursuit of truth. I find that reality is unknowable, and each individual has their own truth. My work is about the bigger societal picture of what builds a safe and free community. I discovered that understanding policing was really about understanding crime, and understanding crime was really about understanding human behavior. From this path, I have made claims that I wish to be held to the strongest levels of debate and scrutiny. Anyone willing to publicly debate anything I have stated, please reach out and do it. There is no need to write cowardly articles or play gossip girls on social media. I'm right here. Anything about policing, gun control, violence, crime, race, mass organizations, media, and such, email info@imembermedia.com. And someone will respond to arrange a discussion to be posted right here on the Nuance podcast and video broadcast. Here are some of the arguments I make that supposedly have many willing to debate but never seem to show up. Not a single police department is fighting the things that cause crime. All violence is a biological malfunction. There are 4 outstanding correlates to violence and crime. In order of prominence, they are environmental toxins, resource inequality, local instability, and the use of state-sanctioned violence. The Second Amendment prevents the superior right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Second Amendment is the recipe of police killings. That means killing cops and killer cops. The difference between gender and sex is simple, and there are limitless genders. There is no such thing as being transgender. I have found that the history of American policing has a foundation of 3 pillars which continue to define the fundamental functions of policing in the United States. They are the first and primary pillar of American policing, the creation and maintenance of oppressed classes from which resources are extracted to institute continued oppression. Second is the valuing of superior class property over the lives of oppressed classes. And third, the continued genocide of the indigenous nations of North America. All media pundits are phony intellectuals and will only debate the ignorant or other media pundits who are in on the game. It is impossible for the current structures to fix policing to serving the people. The police must be restructured to take orders from the community, not institutional power systems. There is no free will. And I'm sure there are plenty more if you choose to look. So if any of these or any of those strike you or are something you want to argue, then do not just sit there. If you think your favorite pundit will destroy me in a debate, then do not tell me. I don't give a damn. Petition them to further the discussion. I will always be respectful. I will not insult, but I will do the most offensive thing that you can do to another person. I will treat you like an equal. Email info@imembermedia.com
or go through the website, imembermedia.com. Reach out.
Okay. Yeah. I understand what you're coming from. I've lived in Arizona since 2000. Pretty much since I've turned 21, I've been armed. I had a rifle when I was 18, I believe, and ever since I turned 21, I've been carrying handguns. You mentioned the 17. I got a 19 right here. 17's downstairs in the holster, but my concealed carry is a 19. I've been stopped probably, well, not stopped. I've had interactions with law enforcement probably close to 20 times, not for nefarious purposes, just casual run-ins at gas stations, being stopped for traffic incidents.
Sure.
And honestly, I've never really had a bad experience with law enforcement. Every time they were aware that I was armed, and I couldn't sense any hesitation or nervousness on the part of the police officer, and I wasn't nervous either, because I understand that as long as I do what I'm supposed to do in that situation, nothing will ever come of it as far as force. I think where that is derived from is the culture. Arizona is very pro-gun. It's like the Wild West here. There's so many guns here. Cops, if they were nervous about being firearms, this is the absolute wrong place to be a law enforcement officer.
I've already bitched about that multiple times. Well, not bitched, but just commented on it.
So I guess the point I'm trying to get at is in Arizona, the culture with law enforcement around firearms is you're going to run into a million of them, and not one of them is ever going to be a problem. I spoke to an officer here once that was on the force for 30 years in just Arizona, and not once has he ran into an issue with somebody that was carrying an illegal firearm, and outside of like drug raids and stuff like that, but just in the daily performance of his duties. When you go to like the Midwest, extreme examples, New York, New Jersey, Baltimore, where you have huge problems with gang violence, Chicago, places in California. Yeah, you're going to run in the culture with law enforcement regarding firearms is going to be much different because the environment's different. The percentage that they may run into an illegal firearm or somebody that has ill intent that is also carrying a firearm, I suppose it's much more prevalent. Just maybe based off of the gun control laws of who's allowed to have them and who's not, outside of what they're actually doing, is much more strict, and so it's much more likely that if they run into a firearm that there could be a problem with it. And so I could appreciate why their mentality would be different than law enforcement. I can't really talk to them because that's not my experience. My experience is with Arizona law enforcement. And honestly, I don't think that Arizona law enforcement are scared around guns. The two examples I could point to is one, you as a former law enforcement officer, you know about turning your back to threats. You understand sitting in corners, looking at the door, and all the stuff that comes with being able to keep your spatial awareness of situations at all times while on the job. I walked into a gas station one time, and there was two police officers that were in line to go to the register. As I walked up behind them, I was open carrying. It was plainly visible. One of the officers on the right turned around, glanced at me, glanced at the gun, glanced back up at me, and then turned his back to me and stood there for the rest of the duration until they were done conducting their business, because just the 2-second glance at me, he determined that I was absolutely of no threat and had his back to me. The second occurrence it actually happened at the exact same gas station, which was next to my house. As I was walking in there, I was in front of the line. I was taking care of my business, and the police officer walked in behind me. At the time, I was carrying a 1911, and the officer behind me had a 1911 as well, because apparently Chandler PD had revised their policies in allowing officers to carry certain firearms. And so this officer had chosen to carry a 1911. And we had a really great discussion about his Colt and my SIG, and we ended up going out to the parking lot. And now I'm not one to ever really relinquish my rights, but he asked if he could see it for the purposes of checking it out, because he was also a gun guy. And I had made the joke, yeah, I'll hand you my gun if you hand me yours. Well, I guarantee you it's against his policy, but he unloaded his 1911 and handed it to me after I handed him mine. But so there was absolutely no fear there. I'm sure those are very extreme examples, but that's my experience in Arizona. And, if you take that officer, that's those same officers, and you transplant them into a gang-ridden neighborhood in whichever town, instantly their response to those kinds of situations will change. And I understand that, but I don't believe that there's a general consensus of fear. Now, at the same time, I do absolutely believe that even though your local law enforcement could be your uncle, your brother, your friend, your neighbor, that kind of stuff, you're absolutely at risk of tyranny from them. And that the Second Amendment does afford you the right to defend against tyranny from those people as well, if it were to so come. The earlier point I made about the Battle at Athens, that was against the local sheriff, I believe. And that was just the people against the sheriff. Unfortunately, I think it comes down to the culture and training of law enforcement. I think there's a huge problem in that I don't believe officers are trained remotely enough in de-escalation of problems. They're taught to escalate and control situations, and control them by escalating in use of force. I absolutely believe that every instruction that an officer gives you, whether it's a traffic stop or just a casual stop on the street, it's under the threat of death. And if you don't comply, eventually the escalation of force will get to the point where he kills you.
You see how much that puts us in common? That puts us on the same exact page. And that's the same page Black Lives Matter is saying, even though I'm not really on that side as an organization, but as that concept there.
Oh, no, I believe me and you would agree on quite a few things. But it's because of those kinds of problems that we would need the Second Amendment. Like I said, if you don't comply with an officer's demand, that it will lead up to the point where he kills you. I think that's important for a lot of reasons. One of the upcoming reasons could be the creation of red flag laws.
You got 1 minute, I'm taking over.
I'm sorry?
You got 1 minute and I'm taking over. So go ahead,
okay.
red flag laws.
Okay, yeah. So the creation of red flag laws, I believe that could create a huge problem, that an officer that may believe that it's a violation of a certain number of constitutional rights, they have to enforce it because they have a job, or they have a house, they have a family, they have a mortgage, things they have to take care of, and they're going to choose to go ahead and enforce that law. And that is under the threat of death, that they're going to be violating your constitutional rights. And I think it's most likely a situation that's under the red flag law that'll get officers killed because they don't decide to execute a little officer discretion and choose to not enforce a law. That's already happened in, I believe it was Maryland or Missouri, or one of those two, where an individual was killed when law enforcement were trying to execute a red flag gun confiscation.
Yeah, I remember what you mean.
But,
okay.
Go
All
ahead.
right. Well,
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that's an issue, and we're also going to discuss that issue a little bit on the notes that I had up there real quick. So give me 10 minutes where you answer a few things. So I agree with you in this kind of culture aspect but I want to reiterate that this is a national law. So what you do does matter to Baltimore and how things do take place in Baltimore. So we have to consider the country as a whole. I will always think that it is much easier to change something that is an object or to regulate objects as opposed to regulating people. I think that is hugely problematic. And when we start throwing up things about how we regulate the Second Amendment, we start talking about how we regulate people. And I think that's very tyrannical. Mm-hmm. But if you said about the culture in Arizona, so where would we expect the Phoenix Police Department to be on per capita killings of citizens in this culture?
I couldn't answer that question. I honestly, I've never looked those numbers up.
Yeah. So if what you're saying was true, though, what would you guess?
Are we talking about killing of armed people?
I mean,
or
you realize that Baltimore would kill, like, the proportion of cops killing people in Baltimore is higher than the general police departments. You accurately recognize that.
Sure.
So where do you think Phoenix would lie in comparison?
I believe Phoenix is probably up there. Maybe not quite as close to Baltimore, but probably pretty close.
Phoenix is number 1.
Is it really?
The entire nation.
Oh, wow.
Just so we know, so in the country, in the state where I was amazed that you can literally buy a motorcycle, ride it down the street with no helmet, have a gun attached to the motorcycle, end your car, ride down the street, and this was perfectly fine with nothing but a driver's license. I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
But largely it is okay here. I will concede that. And I think that under certain parameters, we have different discussions. I think that if you end the drug war, we have a different discussion.
I'm all for ending the drug war.
But we're not in that place. So how do we assure that people like you are the only ones that have the guns versus the people that Phoenix has to kill?
How would you define people like me?
Well, you said that you were in a store, you're aware of your surroundings, you understand to be in a certain mind state when you are armed at all point in times. We know this is not true. We have videos of FBI agents doing ridiculously retarded things. Yeah, and I said retarded. Sorry, I'm not buying the PC culture. It's on that as well.
I'm not a politically correct person.
So. That's what I'm saying. I think we're both on that same page as well.
I call things as I see them.
So how do we deal with that?
I think a lot of the gun community tries to encourage this onto itself. Training is a big thing. Being self-aware is a big thing. When I mentioned the officer turned around and saw me.
How do we assure? How do we as a society?
I don't believe we can. You're talking about controlling people and how they act and stuff like that, and I don't believe you can. Nobody is the same. You know.
Well, shit, that's honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be the first to admit that the first instance where there was two officers in front of me and he turned his back to me after looking at me. Had I been black, the situation may have gone a little differently. He could have sidestepped, so his body was 90 degrees to me, so he could see his partner and me. You know, it could have gone a whole different ways. When you're profiling people, because law enforcement is trained to profile, and I've read quite a bit about this, but there's a million things that go into this that are very hard to explain. The way someone looks, where their eyes are pointed, the way they're holding their hands, or is their head down, is their head up, are they wearing a hoodie? There's a million different things that go into that. And for whatever reason, the totality of those circumstances in my incident told the officer not to worry. One of those things could have been different, and the officer would have got a different impression, and he would have sidestepped or placed himself behind me, or just acted differently. I don't know how you can control people. I'm a big advocate of open carry and concealed carry. I like open carry because it invites a lot of conversation from people that come up to me and ask me questions. I can't tell you how many times I've been stopped and asked if this is just even legal or how to do this and stuff like that. So I'm kind of an advocate of dressing nice, not looking like a thug. Being very polite and cordial and open to discussions and stuff like that, because I try to be a proponent of the Second Amendment, and I'm not out there to just carry my gun and say I'm doing it for my rights and just be be rude about it. That's not my game. So how do you get people to do that? I don't think you can force anybody to do it. It's just something that So
anybody should be able to buy guns, like even convicted felons.
Okay, so convicted felons. This is based on the premise that I believe that the justice system needs to be reformed as well. But I believe that as society, if a individual has done the time for their crime, and we as a society believe that they're safe and they're allowed to be able to be returned to the streets, their full rights need to be restored.
God, I hope you vote for that way. But okay.
I absolutely would. Now, that's with the caveat that if somebody commits, an atrocious act where we as a society believe that person should not be armed, they should not be allowed out of jail. I'm sorry.
That's consistent.
Yeah,
that's fine.
I would apply the same kind of concept to like sex offenders. If somebody rapes a child, they should absolutely never be allowed out of jail. But if their sex crime is so low that we as a society believe that after 10 years or whatever that they're free to return back to society, I don't think they should be on a list, because I believe it kind of denies them the opportunity to lead a successful life. But that would come.
Schizophrenics?
I'm sorry.
What about like people with paranoid delusions and schizophrenia?
They absolutely should not own a gun.
How do we make sure that?
So there's actually, I don't see, that's the problem with red flag laws, is I believe that they're a reinterpretation to make current laws easier on the state and cheaper on the state.
I agree, but how do we keep the gun out of the schizophrenic paranoid delusion?
So the current way this is performed is, I can use Arizona as an example. Arizona has a 72-hour psychiatric hold that they can place on an individual, which can be extended up to 14 days.
But who enforces that hold?
The doctors, the 72-hour...
Somebody's going to come in and make that person comply. Who's that?
That would be law enforcement.
Yeah, but you're making an appeal for law enforcement to enforce something.
Yep, absolutely.
It's fine.
I agree.
You're making an argument for police to enforce a gun regulation under the threat of death.
No, I'm not going to. I don't see this as a gun regulation. So the difference between what is current.
Well, okay, I got to hear that out. That's okay.
No,
so how is it?
Okay, I'm going to stutter a little bit. This one's hard for me to articulate. It's clear in my head, but it's hard for me to get out. Okay, so I see mental health and guns as two different things. The current way under the law is that we deal with mental health. If somebody is a danger to themselves or others, they're put on a 72-hour hold, which can be extended to 2 weeks, and then drug out to 1 year at the direction of a judge for somebody being formally committed. At that point, if you are if they're formally committed, I believe the legalese terminology is mentally defective. So they've been ruled or adjudicated mentally defective. At that point, that should be added to the Nexus system, which would bar you from purchasing a firearm and owning a firearm. And I'm all for
but
that.
They can still get it on the black market. So how would we regulate that?
Well, the problem you run into is if the individual is out on the streets, they should have their full rights. If we as a society believe that that person is a danger to themselves, they should be committed.
Children cops in the military don't have full rights.
Sure. But the way I see it is if the person is allowed to be out free and own a car, they should have their full rights. If we're going to start denying rights to firearms, we need to deal with that problem. Because if a person is psychotic, whether or not they have a firearm or not, they can absolutely still hurt people.
But Jordan, you're either saying that we're going to steal all these taxes from people to pay for beds and facilities to keep people who we are essentially doing a minority report on. We're saying that they're a threat, so we either have to lock them up or allow them to be a threat. And we, like in Baltimore, we have tons of people with schizophrenia around because there's no beds for them. There's only one hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So are you arguing that we should take more money from people, as a libertarian, you're arguing that we should take more money from people so that we can house all the people that are dangerous enough to not be able to have have all their rights?
I don't think it would be more money. If you did like a reform of like the prison system and why people are in jail, like if you were to completely abolish the drug law, the drug war, and remove all people from possession, you have this.
But on principle, so I get that, but so even then we're just shifting the wrong theft of something else. So
sure. Just
as its principle, we're either so here's the thing. If owning a gun is a right, then you have made the parameter that violent enforcement must take place.
Sure.
So my solution to the gun problem, if you haven't heard it before, is to regulate manufacturing. Because I think the obvious issue that you could do is just change the supply and demand parameters, and you regulate manufacturing so that they don't produce the guns. You change the thing that a gun on the street, a handgun on the street, instead of being worth $300 is suddenly going to be worth thousands of dollars and continuing to escalate up. And so people have a problem with that, and I really never heard an actual legitimate argument against that idea. But the issue there is that when we stop that, I'm regulating an object, and you are talking about regulating people. And I think that is at its principle also tyrannical.
The reason I said I see mental health and firearms as separate is just because not all mental health issues derive themselves with a firearm. Somebody could use a car, for example. Somebody could use a knife. There's a whole host of reasons. But if somebody is a danger to themselves, whether or not they have access to a firearm or not, they need to be treated. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people in inner cities that have huge mental health issues. I've driven downtown Phoenix before, and I've seen these for myself. A lot of the homeless population has huge mental issues. And that, I believe, is that needs to be solved. Or not solved, but, those people need treatment. They could have the opportunity with proper treatment to lead productive, normal lives, but unfortunately it's not available to them. I see that separately because I see the firearm as the tool. The problem with mental health is the people. Although the majority of my views are libertarian, some of them are conservative, and I do believe in a limited form of government, and part of that limited form would be keeping actual dangerous people off the street. Whether or not they have access to a firearm or not, they shouldn't be on the street. If somebody is ruled or adjudicated mentally defective by a court based off of evidence from doctors, yeah, they should be treated. They shouldn't be released.
All right. Can I read you the first paragraph on that note? I'm going to read you the first paragraph of chapter 45 in my book. Okay? This is what I think about mental illness. We are all mentally ill. It is a condition of being a barely evolved ape. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the interaction of great apes and death sticks. The soldier is trained with weapons because those weapons make him strong. A police officer who carries a firearm does so under the assumption that it will make her more powerful. Skilled use of weaponry makes one stronger than they were before. The weak become stronger and the strong grow unstoppable while death accumulates. Soldiers kill, police dogs kill, spouses kill, children murder, and even toddlers have ended life with a gun in hand. So that's the first paragraph, and that I get what you're saying about mental illness, but I don't believe it's an actual real thing. These are just expressions of the human biology.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us are susceptible to them at any point in time. Mm-hmm. The idea that I can't go crazy is fallacious. Something can happen to my biology, and I can go grab my Benelli, which is a straight shit kicker, semi-automatic, 12 gauge that I have, holds 12 rounds. I got some on the side, and I can grab my Glock, and somebody like me will do unbelievable amounts of damage. Luckily, no one with my skill set has gone crazy. What are we going to do when that happens?
Well, the name evades me, but there was that police officer in California.
Don't say Mike
that went rogue.
Fucking National Guard ass. You know that ain't what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard question to answer because unfortunately you're doing a Minority Report kind of thing. You're saying because inevitably people could snap that we have to remove this object from all people. I mean, law enforcement officers could snap.
No,
military
I'm not
officers
saying all
could
people.
snap.
I'm not saying all people.
Okay.
Right. So I'm saying that we have to realize that there is an equation. Right. So there's always a pro-con analysis. And to get anywhere honest, we have to admit that we are accepting the death of a certain amount of Americans so that we can have this right or have this law or something like that. And I think we're very disingenuous about what we're willing to sacrifice for our laws.
I will absolutely agree with that. I believe that there's an acceptable loss, unfortunately.
Yeah, I will agree with you too. So fine, we're both being honest in that.
Yeah.
I think that if you're talking about, 200 people being killed by the cops that have weapons on them, yeah, I'm kind of comfortable with that. 1,000 starts to seem quite ridiculous, and the idea that we don't view them as complete failures every time sounds ridiculous. Our number one job is to protect the life of the citizens, not our own. Like, I understand the law doesn't say that, but that's our job in concept. Yeah. Now, you said something earlier about fighting back at the police, and the thing I want to say is I don't know how you would even get started unless you were like an underground operation. because like cops like me, dude, I picked out the biggest, baddest dude I could find and crushed him the second I stepped foot in a new area. And the whole point of that should be obvious when it's surfaced, that there's a new sheriff in town.
Yeah.
And so if you're ever revealed as that person, how do you even get to the point where you can organize enough?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about, like, if I romanticize the idea how I could possibly see this play out, the only thing that really comes to mind is long range, large calibers, guerrilla warfare tactics. If you could, if somebody were to inflict enough damage, you know the saying, you know, it only takes one flea to drive a big dog crazy. You know, depending on the situation, if law enforcement realizes that the job that they're going to go do that day when they put on the duty belt and the vest, if it's not worth the squeeze and they quit, you run into a situation where law enforcement isn't willing to do the job and there is no actual fight that takes place. It's just them standing down. I read a little bit about your concept of citizen-led policing, and I think it's a terrific idea. The question that arose out of that is how does that get implemented? Because I don't think you're going to find anybody that's in control, like, you know, a city manager, a mayor, a police chief, that's willing to like hand over the reins and allow a new concept to come in, because people like power. You know, when somebody has power, they're not going to just willy-nilly give it up, especially for something that's not tried and true or something that wasn't their idea. But if you were to go back to the example of the Battle of Athens when the sheriff was overthrown, there was effectively a law enforcement agency like there was today, but they were doing bad things, and the citizen rose up and overthrew it. After an event like that, where law enforcement stands down, there is your opportunity to come in with your great idea and institute a whole different mentality of law enforcement, where you are affecting, you know, all the principles that you've talked about as far as dealing with community issues from the community.
Right.
But I don't think that getting something like that installed is ever going to come without a fight, per se. You know, maybe not a physical fight, but some sort of incident where law enforcement stands down and relinquishes control. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have an immediate objection to that. But so we have some ways, and if you ever want to get into the details of how you implement that, there's a friend of mine who he really dug into all of that, knows the politics of different areas. I'm sure he would tell you that there are referendum possibilities and stuff like that, and sheriffs. And yeah, you're right. The biggest misalignment and the top thing that we have is that the police departments are essentially the military wing of a mayor. They do not serve people at all.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And that is a huge issue. So yeah, it could get there, but I think this is kind of like what you were talking about before. But don't you think in America it's easier to change the law than to blame the cop?
Sure. It's easier to change a law than to blame a cop. I think a big problem with law enforcement, or a big problem with the perception of law enforcement is pretty much since, you know, I was a child, I was kind of conditioned to always trust law enforcement, listen to law enforcement, never disobey law enforcement. You know, it's something that's kind of ingrained in people. For people to sit back and actually think of cops in a really objective light as to officers making conscious decisions whether or not to enforce law A or decide that I'm not going to enforce that law, you know, that's really, really hard. You know, I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was still kind of an environment where law enforcement had officer discretion, really to a great level. I remember hearing people of my parents' age talking about getting pulled over where DUI was against the law. And an officer was very kind and would throw them in the back of the squad car, take them home, and not issue citations because they had discretion to do those kinds of things. But nowadays, an officer would be immediately terminated if they failed to make that arrest and chose a different avenue. I think the problem with law enforcement is we don't have officer discretion. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, when you're talking about gun confiscation, officers will never do that." I absolutely believe they will, and I believe the evidence shows that they will. military as well. After Hurricane Katrina, both the National Guard and the law enforcement did a gun confiscation. A lot of people don't like to talk about that, and it was a really, really poor stain on American history as far as I'm concerned. But that also leads back to my point where I said most American gun owners are FUDs, and they'll never put their money where their mouth is. Because I absolutely believe that after Katrina, that would have been a great time for the American gun owners to stand up and say, hell no, you cannot confiscate our guns, especially in the greatest time of need.
I'm afraid of you and Avi having a conversation. You guys are going to be forming a militia and finding where you're going to install civilian-led policing, and I'm going to be sitting there going, I didn't mean this way, guys.
Well, no. I understand your concept for civilian-led policing. I agree with it. It's just like how you get to that point. I don't believe
that's the ultimate challenge. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I have no answers. I think that you can't convince people to unite enough to take over power and cede it because they're all too damn comfortable in where they are anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that you can apply that to almost any political hot button subject. That people just are lazy now. You know, people don't care enough about politics, whether it's the left or the right. The left actually, I think, decimates the right when you're talking about political activism. You know, if you've seen some of the protests and even to riots and stuff like that, holy cow, they have a lot of people that get up and talk and actually kind of put their money where their mouth is and get out there and do things. It's incredibly hard to get anybody that's pro-gun to actually do anything. You know, I work with a bunch of guys that are pro-gun, and I'll talk to them about different gun legislation that's coming through, and they're like, wow, you know, I wish we could do something about it. And I'll tell them, have you contacted your senator? Have you contacted your congressman? No. I said, why not? I don't have time for that. Unfortunately, people just don't care enough. I mean, you know, everybody has an opinion, but no one's willing to do anything. And I think that's the vast majority of America on almost every political hot-button topic.
Doing something makes me think what you're saying about that BLM thing. And so people know when we say BLM, we're talking about the Bureau of Land Management, not Black Lives Matter, which is, I've still
yes.
people mixing that up. But in that incident with the Bundys, why do you think the police didn't stand down in Standing Rock, where I was there? I don't know if you know, but I was part of that veteran movement.
Unfortunately, I didn't really follow that event closely due to personal issues in my life at the time. It's something I absolutely need to research more. I don't know a lot of the intimate details of that. I think I remember hearing that it was on Indian land at first, and then it was ruled that it wasn't, and then there was a whole bunch of like technical issues on both sides of that.
Well, sure.
I just
mean the idea of state-sanctioned agents doing the work of the oligarchy and attacking citizens, but nobody really cared up there. I'm telling you right now, when you talk about weapons and the ability to fight back, when they say, you'll hear reports when you get there, and I've never told anybody this before, but so it'll be on this podcast the first time ever, but when you hear reports that they had weapons in Standing Rock, when you research it, you'll see that they did. They had lots of weapons and were planning on going after the cops there with violence. That never took place, but despite the presence of a huge force, I mean, yeah, the government stood down for a little while. I mean, they stood, 3,000 veterans showed up and they stood down for a couple weeks. But it's not, like, I get what you're saying about standing up, but I still just, I see these examples where tyranny is enacted, and sometimes it's even on a mass scale. In like Waco, you know, like, God, Jesus Christ, could we have handled Waco a little bit better? Like those kind of situations, I feel like still nobody does shit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'd have to take your word on it for Standing Rock, but yeah, Standing Rock, Bundy Ranch. I think the Mulner Wildlife Refuge, it was kind of done by the same people from the Bundy Ranch. I don't know how I feel about that one. I think that one was a little weird. I think they were trying to ride some coattails on that one. And it didn't work out exactly the way they envisioned that. But I think that one was pretty poorly planned. So, yeah, I don't really know. But how you change people until something hits somebody in their pocketbook and directly affects their ability to do something, they just don't care. You know, most people don't have an opinion about abortion, for example. I'm sorry, most people have an opinion about abortion. If you're pro-choice, that's fine. They'll tell you that, but they won't ever go out and argue or protest for it. But the moment something is regulated, when the moment they walk into the office of the abortion, they're going to have a huge problem with it. Same thing with pro-life, you know, the other way. You know, they'll be very, very pro-life. But until an abortion clinic pops up next to their house, they won't do anything about it. You know, so until something directly affects people, people just don't care. I think most people see problems as other sides of the country, and so it doesn't affect them. And they're just not willing to risk any part of their personal life, their career, to stand up for what they believe in. And that's why when talking about, you know, the militias fighting tyranny, I don't believe it'll ever be a grand scale national thing. You know, the people versus the federal government. I just don't believe that could ever really play out in any sort of real way. What you could see is incidents like the Bundy Ranch, very localized rebellion. California is like a sanctuary state for illegal immigrants. You may run into a situation where, say, for example, the state of Arizona becomes a sanctuary state for firearms. Because if, say, the governor comes out and says, you know what, we believe the GCA, the NFA, the Hughes Amendment, all those are constitutionally, those are constitutional violations, and none of those will be enforced in the state of Arizona. And all of a sudden, machine guns are completely unregulated in the state, and all kinds of things. You're going to see events like something like that, very localized, but I don't believe something's going to be grand scale, because the reason it won't be grand scale is the people on the other side of the country just don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that as a position, but then, so would you say that the tens of thousands of suicides, deaths, shooting victims are all, and fear that's being sown is all worth the idea that appears statistically impossible to actually occur?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
So if it's a pro-con analysis, would you then say that we have tens of thousands of suicides, we have tens of thousands of handgun deaths, we have shootings, we have fear being sown, we have cops that are afraid that everyone's armed. Is that really enough on the pro side that it's worth the potential for something that appears to be significantly guaranteed to not actually be able to occur, the uniting of a militia to stand up against tyranny?
I think it's an acceptable cost to pay. Yeah. A lot of it's very unfortunate, but yeah, I believe it's the unfortunate cost you pay to be able to maintain the original intent of the Second Amendment.
Well, in that case, I would retract one Instagram post that I made that said, I don't know who is more intellectually dishonest, gun proponents or climate change scientists. And I will say that I have yet to meet an honest climate change scientist, or at least a liberal one. But I guess we found an intellectually honest gun proponent.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, you admit that it has its weaknesses, but to your evaluation, which is subjective,
sure,
it's worth it.
Yeah,
I don't think it's worth it.
And I'll end that. So my older sister actually commit murder-suicide. She had postpartum depression. She ended up drowning her infant and then shooting herself. And even though something like that did hit very close to me, I'm still a proponent of gun ownership. And so I absolutely have been personally affected by the negative use of firearms. But unfortunately, or not fortunately, I still I believe it's an acceptable cost to pay as a society. So, I mean, it's not where I'm not coming from a heartless place. It personally did happen to me and my family.
I expect that. I respect that position, And I honestly don't have anywhere to go with you from that. I think I will have to sleep on it and find some things that maybe we can revisit on. But I'm quite proud of us. I think we succeeded in a successful discussion of a gun proponent versus a gun control person that is at a perfectly good understanding. And I think we could agree, if we were the two arguing over where we draw the line, then you would be willing to make that battle. I don't think you're going to get. Do you think the handguns are worth it, or would you be willing to concede the handguns for the more open ability to combat the military? So would you say, how would you go against the government? You were talking about guerrilla tactics and sniping and stuff like that, right? So I have zero objection to you owning a 50 cal sniper rifle.
Thank you.
So, because to me, that means you're going to go against the government. You're not going to use it until it really matters. And I don't have a history of people owning those guns and using them for crimes. I have a huge history of people doing that with handguns.
Yeah.
So my big thing is that I don't want these handguns out there. But I'm fine with you having a shotgun and a 50 caliber Barrett. I would probably be more fine with you having C4 than with having handguns.
I guess the way I look at it is the, I can't look at it from the criminal's eyes, but I can understand that they carry handguns because they're concealable. It allows them to get a lot of places very easily without being noticed and stuff like that. And the vast majority of gun crime is committed with a handgun. It's exponentially higher than rifles or shotguns. The only reason I would argue for them is rifles and shotguns are offensive weapons in their practical application and use. Handguns are defensive. There's a lot of things in the gun.
Shotgun's the greatest defensive weapon made.
Well, sure, but okay. So rifles. Rifles are offensive. Handguns are defensive. There's a lot of sayings in the gun community that you use your handgun to fight your way back to your rifle. The decision in.
But if I'm saying have your rifle, what do you need the handgun for?
Well, I believe it also it falls under the purview of the Second Amendment. In the what was it 1934? Congress passed the Gun Control Act of 1934, and then in 1939 there was a court case, the United States versus Miller, and in that court case there was an individual that had a short-barreled shotgun, and he wanted to have it, and he thought the Second Amendment allowed him to have it. And the Supreme Court ruled that the short-barreled shotgun was not covered under the purview of the Second Amendment because it was not applicable to actual militaries. No military at the time used a short-barreled shotgun, and it wouldn't have been useful for the preservation and efficiency of a militia based on that. So the shotgun was ruled to not be under the short-barreled shotgun was ruled to not be under the purview of the Second Amendment, which, because I kind of understand the Second Amendment's original meaning, I do believe in that. I don't believe all rights are, unending. Like there's absolutely limits to rights, and when talking about the Second Amendment,
I think it's a handgun.
Well, handguns are, effective and useful for militaries. Most soldiers were issued Berettas and now they're issued SIGs. Because the military, the soldiers carried those are bearable arms, that I believe handguns do fall underneath the purview of all that. That is where, a lot of gun control advocates will say, well, then if the government has it, why can't I have nukes? Well, I think that argument is completely irrelevant because it talks about bearable arms, which are arms that can be carried by your standard soldier, not nuclear weapons. So I guess where I would draw the line is what type of weapon is.
So you're saying if you can't carry it, it doesn't apply?
No. Like physically carried and
Yeah.
bared. So the original definition of bearing in arms was the arms of which a soldier would carry into battle. They weren't talking about artillery when they used the word bear. Like, you're not bearing a cannon, you're not bearing a nuclear weapon. You're bearing a rifle and a pistol, a shotgun, a flamethrower. You could bear an RPG. I suppose you could bear C4. Although although I'm kind of a proponent of it, I'm not unrealistic. I don't think people should have C4.
You can definitely bear them.
Sure. But I don't think people really should have C4. I think that should fall outside of the purview of bearable arms, because it's not really an arm. It's an explosive device.
So what would you think about me then trying to argue that the military should not be using handguns? Because I'm willing to bet you that it is less than 0.5%. It's less than 0.1% of people in combat are killed with handguns. Like, I was in the Marine Corps in 1997. That was with much inferior technology than we have now when it comes to submachine guns and stuff. The idea that I would have actually used my pistol I can't even envision the scenario. I mean, we trained with it, but I just don't know why I need that.
Well, sure. No, that kind of comes back to what I said about that a rifle is offensive and a pistol is defensive. You know, your pistol is there as your last line of personal defense. You're not going to go wage a war with a pistol, but it's there to protect you.
But you are going to win no battles against law enforcement if you are in a defensive position. You understand that?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
You're going to lose every single one. You must be offensive.
Yes,
what would
I
you
absolutely.
use defensive weapons for with tyranny? You would only need offensive.
Sure, but the premise that our modern military goes out and establishes an offensive position while carrying a pistol for defense, the same concept should apply to the militia as well.
Yeah, I'm just it's an interesting point you pointed out, and you're just making me realize that there's no point for the common soldier to have a fucking pistol.
Oh no, yeah.
I bet you they kill themselves more with their pistols than they ever kill any enemy.
Yeah, most likely, because I mean, if you look at this is pure conjecture, but if you were to look at an incident where a soldier would pull out his pistol, he's in some shit. You know?
I can't imagine the Marine Corps ever even being in that situation in modern warfare. Like, how did we get here? Like, we don't even take a hit. What do you mean?
Yeah, that soldier would be, pretty much overwhelmed with the situation at that point. Absolutely. I mean, that's an absolute worst case scenario for a soldier when he draws his pistol. But
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I felt like if my rifle was down, I'm like, I'm fucked. I don't know what to say, because if that other guy's got a rifle, the reason I had a rifle to begin with was probably because the other guy had a rifle. Now, if he has a rifle and I have a handgun, I am screwed.
Yeah, but most law enforcement in this country, sure, they may have a rifle or a shotgun or their offensive weapon in their vehicle. Most of them don't patrol with it slung over their shoulder.
Yeah, I don't think
and
they should.
So by me carrying a pistol, I have the same firepower effectively as the officer, so we're equalized.
You shouldn't have.
I believe that meets the definition.
But you should have the rifle. You should have the superior weapon. That's my argument.
I mean, in my truck, I do have the rifle because to me it's not logical to walk around with an AR-15. First off, I don't feel it's necessary in my.
It's logical if you're fighting tyranny.
Sure, but it all comes down to what is the statistical probability that I'm going to have to fight tyranny? So then what if I could get?
I don't think cops should be carrying weapons on common patrol.
Okay.
Right. So if we can get cops in the military to give up their handguns, would we get you to give up your handguns?
No.
That wasn't principled at all then.
Well, yeah, I know. That's why I started on that.
I'm not principled either. If you didn't catch on, I own a Benelli, a semi-automatic Benelli, and a Glock. So
nice. Yeah, I understand that, but because I just argued against myself because I said that if the military has it, I should have it, but if the military gives it up, I still don't want to give it up.
Right.
And I guess the only thing I can argue on that point is what in the defense against a foreign enemy. that would actually have those, that I should still be able to have.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say my one thing where I think this is pure conjecture, but if I'm a leader, the level of Thomas Jefferson, and I'm thinking about how I want to structure society, and I recognize that a militia is necessary, but most likely this thing to fight tyranny, this is going to be known. It's not going to sneak up on you. You're not going to like suddenly be hitting the emergency button. You're going to know this is coming.
Yeah.
So the idea of like saying that you need at least 30 people who have concealed carry permits, and if they want more than one handgun and shotgun, then those weapons have to get stored at one of your people's house that has an armory in it. And if you actually had to attack, you just go there. I mean, that's literally what the military does. We don't walk around the street with guns.
Yep.
Why would that be wrong? And we're getting astray here. I wanted to save all this.
Oh, no.
Because
It's good.
Look at us. We're at an hour and a half again.
I think I guess my personal problem with it is because in order for that to work for the civilians, you have to have law enforcement telling them how to control their firearms, and I'm not really okay with that. I believe when I keep and bear arms, it's how I decide is right. If I want to keep them out like this AR-15 above me, or if I want to keep some in my gun safe, or how many I want to have. You know, if an individual acquires many firearms, there's multiple reasons why he might do that. It could be because he's just a gun nut and he wants to have a huge collection, or possibly somebody has a large collection of firearms because they understand that a disaster may occur, whether it's with government, against government, natural disaster, whatever the case may be, and he may need to arm his friends and family, which are unarmed at the point. You run into a whole other issue at that point because you have completely unarmed people with firearms. But if that's what is needed in that situation, a person might have the ability to arm fellow people like the Armory does to the military. I completely.
I'm fine with having that though.
Okay, so what was the point?
I'm fine with you having that armory. So you could say maybe somebody wants this, but yeah, I mean, you're only going to have one of those guys. I mean, even if you look at the numbers now, we all know a guy that's got way too many guns, but that's probably 1 in 20 of the guys we know that have guns.
Sure.
So if we all just kept our guns at his house, the extra ones, as the armory.
Well, I guess it comes down to the beauty of the Second Amendment is like, when does the decision made to roll out? When does the people need to rise up? If you put all the guns in one person's hands, he decides that he makes that decision, and I don't agree with that. It's everybody's decision.
Yeah, but there's 19 of you that have 2 guns apiece. I hope you can regulate that dude if you need to.
Sure, but like, let's say everybody had the guns, and then a Bundy Ranch incident occurs, and everyone decides to go, but the person who holds the guns doesn't agree with it, so he doesn't release them. So if somebody decides,
you obviously couldn't have that. You'd have to have some kind of. This would be easy, just contracts and stuff like that, or everybody could even have a passcode. I'm just talking about cops could go, say they got to do a drug raid. There's no reason why they should ever find 50 guns in a house when it's not the armory, right? So you would end up affecting criminal gun members, not your people by any means. Because if one gets taken over, well, then you have the next one. If it's true tyranny, well, the next one should step up. I mean, we can't believe that you and your 19 friends are going to be the only ones recognizing tyranny.
Sure. Honestly, I don't know if that's actually a fair assessment because, like I said, a lot of people don't care. So it may not. You may have blatant tyranny right in your face.
Hey, you may be
but people won't stand up.
Yeah, you may be a martyr. Yeah, totally.
Sure.
You're a hero. I'm proud of you. you woke the country up to its tyranny, and now we all get to fight back, and we have justification. But somebody's going to be the martyr.
Well, I think I like to believe that a lot of people went to the Bundy Ranch incident because they're familiar with what happened in Waco. They're familiar with what happened at Ruby Ridge, and they just flat out decided that, I'm not going to allow another situation to go down like those two. And unfortunately, yeah, if you're going to step up against the BLM's enforcement agency, which had snipers, helicopters, drones and stuff like that, you're going to need a massive amount of arms. And so by having a lot, you could distribute them.
Do you think you would have been any less effective if the people would have been unarmed?
I think if the people at Bundy Ranch was completely disarmed, the BLM would have continued and would have never stopped. Because where was the incentive to stop?
Yeah, I get what you're saying about some of them, but I mean, if you were going to respond, how much more would the country respond to the idea that this is tyranny? Because you have to be a martyr first for anybody to even wake up.
Sure.
So if you go unarmed and they do something, doesn't that give other people a bigger case? Because if you do a Waco, a vast majority of people are going to believe the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Well, from what I gathered from the Bundy Ranch incident, there was a lot of women that were, when that big line of people started moving underneath the overpass, there was quite a few women that had been very vocal about, hey, I want to be in front, because if those assholes are going to fire, I want them to hit me as an unarmed woman first. So yeah, people absolutely understand how this would kind of have to play out. The law enforcement, in order to win the hearts and minds for that situation, law enforcement would have to make the first mistake. And,
yeah, totally. All right. Well, shit. If that first mistake leads us to civilian-led policing, maybe I'm more on your side than I thought.
Well, it's so complex to talk about, like, the application. So, we can discuss principles of whether or not the militia, who that is, why they exist, and all this other stuff. But when you actually get into, like, the meat and potatoes of the application of the militia, that is an exceptionally complex issue, because every situation in history that I could point to, that you could point to, went down a different way, with a ton of different mitigating factors. And what I'm standing on is that we need to have the right to be able to enter into one of those situations. If you completely remove the right to, I know you're not really arguing for this, but if you were to completely ban firearms or something like that, you remove the option completely off the table. And I think that would be an absolute huge problem.
Would you agree we don't need handguns for that?
I don't believe sure, yeah. I mean,
I'm going to get those damn handguns away from you eventually. If it's the fifth, sixth, or seventh discussion we have.
For the application of the militia, the handgun only serves as a personal defense weapon. That's it. And yeah, the vast majority of crimes are committed with them. But I still believe that it's an acceptable price to pay for having the ability to carry a pistol.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end it, because I can't really argue against you believing that it's worth the price, as long as you admit that that's the price.
Yeah, and it's a huge price. It's a huge price. But I believe it's acceptable.
Shit, I respect that. So let's try and mull this over.
Sure.
I think I very much enjoyed talking to you. I think we set the stage very well for future people to try and do this, and maybe we'll set it up so that you can talk to them too, if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
These discussions are a deeply personal thing for many of us. There is no media support for science and the pursuit of knowledge. Throughout history, power desires a non-critical populace. I'm not begging for money, but I am pleading that you discuss these issues with the people around you and encourage them to share and subscribe. I'm viewing this work as an attempt to collect information from when people are ready to consume it. That makes this a team effort in the end. The more people that participate, the better discussions we get, and the better our outcomes become. I will do my part. You?